Imagine this. One day you wake up and discover that everything you've shared about your life is in the hands of someone you don't know. You have no idea how it happened, nor when you opened the door, but it happened. Every little secret, every confession disguised as a joke, every insignificant detail you let slip without thinking is now a loaded bullet aimed at your head. It sounds exaggerated, and while you take a deep breath, trying to convince yourself it's just a paranoid thought, something inside you begins to stir uneasily, because you know it's true. You've done it hundreds of times. You've given away pieces of your intimacy in exchange for a bit of attention, a bit of empathy, a brief applause that in the end is worth nothing. Now imagine that tomorrow your phone rings. You answer with a trembling voice, and on the other end, a voice you don't recognize says your name, your address, your fears, and recites them with the calmness of someone who knows they have you in their hand. The silence of that call guts you from the inside, because in that instant you understand that it was you who gave away every piece of information. No one forced you. No one held a gun to your head. It was you who, out of habit or need, stripped yourself naked in front of ears that had no interest in protecting you. I'll tell you something even more disturbing. This may already be happening. It's possible that while you listen to these words, there are people who know your deepest cracks. People you don't even like. Doesn't that scare you? Doesn't it freeze your blood to think that anyone could use them when you are most vulnerable? Maybe they don't dare today. Maybe they smile at you while pretending you are special. But the day will come when their mask falls. And then you will wonder why you were so naive. Why you believed that your transparency was nobility and not weakness. And if you think I'm exaggerating, remember that time you told something you swore you'd keep. Remember the fleeting relief you felt, and remember the disgust that came afterward when you realized there was no turning back. That feeling is the prelude to emotional blackmail, to silent manipulation, to dependence. Because it all starts the same way, with a personal story you believe is innocent, with a moment of sincerity that seems cathartic until it stops being so. Until someone decides that your truth serves them more as a weapon than as an anecdote. Let me ask you something. If tomorrow everything you've told is published in front of those you respect most, could you look them in the eye without lowering your head? Or would you feel that toxic shame that stabs your stomach like a knife? Most people couldn't bear that test because no one is prepared to face the real price of their own tongue. And do you know what's the most macabre? The more you tell, the less you know who you are, because you begin to edit your story according to others' reactions. You start exaggerating what you think will impact, softening what you fear they will reject. And little by little, you become an echo of what you once were, a character designed to be approved. Silence is not cowardice. It is a shield. It's the only barrier that prevents others from entering your mind like disrespectful tourists. But you keep opening doors, convinced that this is how you build intimacy. Want to know the truth? Real intimacy is not shared with just anyone. True intimacy is so valuable that it's given drop by drop, and only to those who have proven they will never use it against you. But you probably have spent your whole life doing the opposite, giving away information, begging for connection, surrendering control. And every confession you let slip is another rope tying you to the wrong hands. So today, I tell you this, and it's not advice. It's a reminder that you're playing with your own freedom every time you say too much. And when the day comes when someone decides to use your words as knives, there will be no one to blame but yourself. And if you think this is just a mind game, wait until you feel the real cold of betrayal. That exact moment when you remember every phrase that came out of your mouth and realize you can't take back any of them because everything you've told will continue to exist long after you've changed your mind. Because the greatest danger is not that they judge you for who you are today, but that they crucify you with the stories you let go yesterday. So tell me, do you really want to keep telling everything that happens in your life? Or would you rather start building the mystery that no one can ever manipulate? And while you decide whether you will stay silent or keep narrating every corner of your life, there's something else you probably haven't considered. The public story not only turns your intimacy into merchandise, but also infects your decisions. Because when you live telling what you do, you stop choosing for yourself. Your choices begin to be a performance, a play in which the protagonist dresses up to please the invisible audience he imagines applauding or criticizing every move. And this is where the game gets more perverse. Because while you believe you're being honest, you're actually fabricating versions of yourself that don't come from your desires, but from the hunger for approval. Think about it carefully. How many times have you made a decision thinking about how it would sound when you told it? How many times have you accepted uncomfortable situations because you wanted the story you'd tell later to have a certain air of heroism or tragedy? And if you dare to be brutally honest with yourself, you'll discover it's more than once. Because telling what you live makes you your own chronicler. And when you get used to being a chronicler, you stop being the protagonist. You become a narrator, obsessed with making your story exciting, validated, memorable. Meanwhile, authenticity rots in some corner you no longer visit. Because every time you edit an anecdote to make it more interesting, every time you sweeten your defeats or exaggerate your victories, you drift a little farther from who you were before turning your life into a spectacle. The consequence of this habit is devastating and silent. There comes a time when you no longer know if what you do really matters or if it only matters because you're going to tell about it later. And here I want you to stop for a second. I want you to feel that uncomfortable emptiness that appears when you ask yourself if your actions still make sense if no one watches them. What would remain of your decisions if you could never share them? Would you still care about what you say you fight for? Or would all your enthusiasm fade away knowing there are no spectators? This is the question that destroys more egos than any criticism. Because when your identity feeds on others' gaze, solitude is not a space of peace. It's an unbearable sentence. And do you know what's the most sinister? That this dependence on narrating your life doesn't arise overnight. It's a poison injected in small doses. It starts with a timid confession, continues with a post that gets more attention than you expected, and little by little, it becomes the need to document every last gesture. What one day was spontaneous, tomorrow will be routine. And when you can no longer live without announcing every step, you'll discover you've built a prison with bars made of your own words. And then, while others live lightly without having to answer to anyone, you will find yourself trapped in the absurd commitment to maintain the story. A story that no longer represents you, but you keep feeding it because you're afraid that silence will erase you. Does it seem exaggerated? Look around. See how people exhibit every detail, every trip, every meal, every moment. Observe that collective anxiety not to be forgotten, that sick rush to manufacture a life that seems interesting even if inside it is hollow. And here comes the biggest irony of all. The more you tell, the less you listen to yourself. Because the noise you generate by narrating yourself doesn't let you hear your own inner voice. You become incapable of distinguishing what you truly desire from what you think you should desire so as not to disappoint the expectations you yourself planted. And so your freedom slowly dies under the weight of your own narrative. But there's one detail that almost no one mentions because it's uncomfortable to admit. When you turn your life into a constant story, you inevitably become a product that others consume, compare, criticize, or imitate. And if you think I'm exaggerating, ask yourself, why do so many people feel the need to opine about decisions that don't concern them? Because when you gave them access to your story, you also gave permission to judge it. The public story is an open invitation to anyone's opinion, even from those who don't deserve a second of your attention. But you can't complain because you were the one who opened the door. You who decided that every step had to be announced. And the more you shared, the more you believed it brought you closer to others. However, what happens is that it distances you from yourself. Because when every experience goes first through the filter of how you'll tell it, you lose contact with the most essential truth. Your life is not made to be explained, it's made to be lived. And at that moment, when you stop and ask yourself why you feel so tired, so exposed, so empty, you will understand that it all began when you decided that nothing was worth it if it wasn't public. When you confused sincerity with the obligation to tell everything, and when you allowed your intimacy to become common territory for anyone curious enough to snoop. The question is not whether you can reclaim that sacred space. The question is whether you're willing to do it, whether you can bear the silence that comes when you stop narrating yourself. Because silence at first seems unbearable. It seems like a dark abyss. But it is the only place where you will find yourself again without masks, without applause, and without the gaze of the audience you think you need. And I warn you, if you decide to be silent, many will be uncomfortable because people quickly get used to consuming your story. And when you close the window, when you draw the curtain, when you stop feeding the spectacle, criticism will appear. They'll call you distant, cold, selfish. But it's not selfishness, it's survival. Because if you keep living based on what you tell, one day you'll wake up with the certainty that your entire life was a poorly written script for an audience that never truly watched. And if that doesn't freeze your blood, if that idea doesn't shake your conscience, maybe it's because you've already gotten used to being a product, because the price of exhibiting yourself is higher than anyone ever told you, and you pay it with the most valuable currency you have, your inner peace. So tell me, do you really want to keep narrating every detail? Or would you rather embrace silence and discover what remains of you when no one applauds? Because there, in that silent void, real life begins. The life that doesn't need spectators. The life that isn't told. The life that finally belongs only to you. And while you stay silent, wondering if you'll be able to hold it, there's an aspect that very few dare to recognize. When you stop telling your life, you not only reclaim your intimacy, but you also begin to recognize the difference between what you truly feel and what you felt because others expected you to feel it. This is where something even deeper arises, something almost no one is prepared to face, the absolute responsibility for your own destiny. Because while you lived narrating your steps, you could always blame others' opinions for your decisions. You could justify your cowardice by saying you feared disappointing those who listened. You could disguise your resignations with the excuse that it wasn't the right time or no one would understand. But when you close your mouth, when you decide your life doesn't need a narrator, there's no one left to blame. You discover that deep down, all that public spectacle was a fancy way to avoid the loneliness of your own mistakes. Because it's easier to live depending on others' gaze than to sit in front of your reflection and admit that most of the time you're the one sabotaging yourself. And that uncomfortable silence you find yourself in now has a shade few can bear. There's no script to save you, no applause to distract you, no witness to offer you comfort. There's only you facing the truth you always tried to sugarcoat. Maybe that's why so many prefer to go back to telling their stories. Because exposure, no matter how toxic, is also a refuge. While everyone has opinions about your life, you don't have to take responsibility. But if you endure that loneliness, if you decide to stay silent a little longer, something happens that very few experience. You begin to notice how absurd some things you defended were. You start to clearly see which battles you fought only because they looked good in your story. And then one morning, you wake up with the brutal awareness that half of your problems were nothing more than scenery, noise, cheap theater. It is at that point when a fear even deeper than criticism or rejection arises. The fear of discovering you're not as special as you wanted to believe, that your dilemmas aren't so unique, that your misfortunes aren't so extraordinary. And that's when many run away terrified back to validation, seeking someone to remind them how important they are. Because accepting your own insignificance can be more terrifying than any external judgment. And do you know what's fascinating about this revelation? That if you manage to accept it without hurry and without anesthesia, the freedom that appears is incomparable. Because you stop living to impress, stop speaking to be understood, stop acting to maintain an identity that never really belonged to you. You start for the first time to move solely because you want to. And that genuine desire is so rare, so pure that most don't even recognize it when it appears. But the paradox is brutal. You can't reach it while you keep narrating everything because the story contaminates your perception. It turns you into an actor in a play you created so others would understand you. But in the end, not even you know why you keep it up. And if it seems too abstract, I'll give you an example you'll understand instantly. Think of that occasion when you achieved something you had dreamed of for years. Maybe a job, a relationship, a goal. Remember the first emotion you felt when you got it. It was real. It was pure. It was yours. But almost immediately, your mind started plotting how you'd tell it, who you'd tell first, what words you'd use to make it sound epic, what photo you'd upload to make it look perfect. And when you finally narrated it, when everyone congratulated you, when you received the approval you longed for, something inside you emptied because the original emotion had been replaced by the superficial satisfaction of others validating it. And that emptiness is the clearest mark that your life became a story so well packaged it lost all authenticity. And even if you don't admit it, you know it. Every time you turn your emotions into content, you sacrifice a part of their truth. That's why today I propose something you probably didn't expect to hear. What if you tell nothing? What if for the first time you keep every triumph and every failure to yourself? What if you make your silence a sanctuary where everything is legitimate because it's not subject to anyone's applause? Imagine it for a moment. Waking up knowing no one knows anything about your plans, that there is no audience waiting for your next move, that you don't need others' gaze to know what you do makes sense. That is the most radical freedom you can conquer. And I warn you, it's not comfortable because living without witnesses is living without excuses, without alibis, without that chorus of spectators you can always blame for your doubts. But if you have the courage to inhabit that silence, you'll discover something you won't find anywhere else. Absolute power over your own story. The power of not needing to tell it. The power of owing no explanations to anyone. Because when you're silent, mystery returns to you. The mystery that makes others respect you. The mystery that protects your essence from the dirty hands of others' opinions. The mystery that turns your life into something bigger than a handful of anecdotes destined for the fleeting consumption of those unwilling to build anything real. So if you're still doubting, if you feel this idea overwhelms you, I'll tell you something else. Silence is not absence, it's total presence. It's the presence of your will without filters, your truth without embellishments, your purpose without spectators. And that, even if it scares you, is the only place where finally everything makes sense. And while you visualize that silence, while you feel the brutal discomfort of having no one watching you, a question begins to sprout that almost no one dares to ask. What would happen if tomorrow you disappeared from everywhere? If your social media were blank, if your stories were erased, if no one knew where you were or what you were thinking, would you feel free, or would the anxiety of being irrelevant consume you? Because here is the last trap I want to talk to you about. The belief that being visible is existing. We were programmed to think that if you don't share, you don't exist, that if you don't show, you're worthless. But the most uncomfortable truth is that all that noise you produce to feel important is actually a desperate mechanism to avoid facing your deepest fear, the fear of leaving no mark. But let me tell you something that might change the way you see all this. The deepest marks are not left on the surface of a screen. They are engraved in the memory of those who really were with you, even if you never felt the need to explain yourself. Transcendence is not born from how much you tell, but from how much you build when no one sees. And that secret construction is the only thing that survives when all applause and all judgment disappear. So today I want you to make yourself a silent promise that the next time you feel the temptation to narrate every detail, ask yourself if you do it out of love for your story or out of panic at your silence. Because if it's out of fear, you already know the price will always be your freedom. And if it's out of love, you'll be surprised at how little you need to tell to feel your life has meaning. Look around you. We are living an epidemic of exhibitionism disguised as bravery. People compete to see who reveals more, who confesses more weaknesses, who narrates more dramas. But what almost no one dares to do is to stay silent and hold on to their own mystery. Because silence is uncomfortable, but it is also fertile ground where the decisions that change your destiny sprout. And if you've made it this far, if you've listened to every word without looking away, it means that somewhere inside you, there's a certainty you were avoiding. You know you've been telling everything for too long, that you've made your life a showcase, and it's time to close the display window and recover what you never should have given away. I want that when this video ends, you don't run off to post an inspirational phrase. I want you to stay still in silence, even if your hands tremble with anxiety. Because if you resist that first wave of discomfort, I promise you'll begin to remember who you were before the world convinced you that you only existed if someone was watching you. You don't need to be an open book to deserve respect. You don't need to turn your intimacy into a spectacle to feel valuable. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing. It's moving in the shadows while others scream their need to be seen. Because whoever knows how to hold silence knows how to hold themselves when everything around them collapses. Now, if this stirred something inside you, if you feel that uncomfortable tingling of realizing I'm talking to you, I invite you to acknowledge it, but not out here, not in public. Do it in your mind, in your solitude, and then, if you want to take the next step, subscribe to this channel, because here, we don't come to applaud your excuses or sweeten your fears. We come to tear down everything that keeps you small. And if you've reached the end, I want to propose a very simple but brutally honest challenge. If these words have ignited a spark of recognition within you, that unsettling awareness of how much you've given away, how much you've performed for others, don't just acknowledge it. Act on it. For the next 24 hours, practice radical silence about your personal life. No social media updates about your meals, your thoughts, your struggles, or your triumphs. No detailed recounting of your day to casual acquaintances. Just observe. Pay attention to the urge to share, the discomfort of holding back, and the subtle shift that occurs within you when you resist. This isn't about becoming a recluse. It's about discerning what truly deserves your voice and what is merely a performance. What do you discover when the audience fades away? What truths emerge in the quiet space you create for yourself? Embrace the pause. Discover what remains when no one is watching.